So during this module, we're going to talk about business and politics, but from a historical perspective. The American Revolution was more or less an economic war, and the goal of it was so that the colonies could free themselves from these smothering British mercantile policies. Britain established the colonies so that they could get raw materials from the New World into Britain to be manufactured into other goods. And because of this, the colonists could only trade with Britain and more or less only trade in raw commodities. And so the goal of the American Revolution was to free them from the yoke of these British economic mercantile policies. And Charles Beard, this economic historian, said that more or less that the Constitution was an economic document designed to protect the interests of the propertied middle and upper classes in early America. Now, since the Constitution was adopted, you basically have seen a continuous path of expansion of business power, but also of government beginning to intervene more and more in business. Now, in early America, you have to remember that 90% of the economy was agricultural. We talked about this a little bit in some of our other lectures on business history. So planters and farmers were essentially the political elite. But then Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton thought that the new government should be geared towards the promotion of industry. Once the young nation's economy began to expand, so did the political power of business, however. And you really see this following the period of the Civil War. That was the period of Reconstruction, where the government basically facilitated businesses taking over the defeated southern territories, and they were able to more or less exploit all of the resources of the South for the benefit of business with the backing of the Union Army. And this political ascendancy of business continued to rise. It actually came up, so basically after the election of Ulises Grant all the way up to the election of William McKinley in 1900, business was dominating almost all of American politics. Politicians were more or less owned by businessmen. Now, they used to even say that the senators, being a member of the U.S. Senate, was being part of the Millionaires Club. During our business history module, we talked a little bit about how this ascendancy of business in politics was challenged by a variety of movements, such as the populist movement, which was composed predominantly of farmers who felt disenfranchised by business elites conquering, so to speak, of government. We also had organized labor that began to challenge the power of business, and the anti-saloon league, which was a progressivist movement. Now, after 1900, there began to be more and more reforms stemming from the progressive movement that curtailed overweening corporate power. I talked a little bit about this earlier, where the progressive movement worked to get the 40-hour week, restrict child labor. If you're more interested in this, see some of my business history modules for a little bit more in-depth discussion. Big business was also opposed to suffrage for women because they thought that women would vote in a way that would be contrary to business interests. And the progressive era, of course, pounced on this and tried to use it as a campaigning tool to fight the ascendancy of business in politics. Now, we begin to see during the Great Depression that business more or less dominating politics was not appropriate. It was businesses and their greed that led to the start of the Great Depression and the federal government's inability to combat this greed and have the proper tools to fight the Depression that led to government beginning to take a more active role in curtailing business power. Now, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932, corporations fought him hard and strong because they didn't want him to regulate the banking industry, they didn't want him to strengthen labor unions, and they didn't want him to enact Social Security. So generally speaking, corporations were opposed to everything he tried to implement with the New Deal, but members of society or the general public were very supportive of New Deal projects and reforms. Now, one of the things that I noted that I want you to take note from the New Deal was that Franklin Delano Roosevelt established a philosophy that government should intervene to correct the flaws of capitalism and its economy. And that's a sentiment that has continued to grow even into the present day. In fact, during the 1940s, you actually see that government facilitating business allowed businesses to basically be the American economic bulwark that enabled us to win World War II. And during the 1950s, they faced a supportive environment of business